Hello, everyone. It is 5:30 p.m. and Shabbat is just around the corner, so that means that it is time for a taste of Shabbat. We have gotten through another week. It's crazy. The world is crazy, but we are together. We are here to celebrate Shabbat. We're going to begin with the words of Hine ma tov u'manayim shevet achim gam yachad. How good it is for all of us to be together. Hine ma tov u'manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim 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 shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, ya la 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 la. Hine ma tov, ya la 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 la. Hine ma tov u'manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim shevet achim gam yachad.
Shabbat Shalom. How are you, Cantor?
Shabbat shalom. I'm good. I realized I'm wearing my tallis, and then I remembered, we don't normally wear our tallises for a taste of Shabbat.
It's okay.
It's okay.
Nothing
It's
wrong
good,
with that.
It
matches the adorable pictures that are above your son's crib, right next to you.
My studio, aka the nursery.
Yeah, the lion, the rhino, and the elephant.
It says, stand tall, be happy, be kind, dream big, be yourself, be courageous. We're all about affirmations in this household.
Done. I feel like that's all we need for a taste of Shabbat.
Right?
Those affirmations are all we need. Well, hi everyone. Shabbat Shalom. Lots of deep breaths. And with that, let us light some candles and get into the Shabbat spirit.
Oh boy. I chose the not so good one, so we'll see what happens. Oh, there we go. Okay, we are going to let the stress of the week just drift off of us, and we are going to welcome with open arms all of that light and that relaxation and that hope and that endless possibility that is Shabbat. 1, 2, 3. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. I feel better already. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We're going to recite our Kiddush blessing for those of us who are joining. Before you enjoy your Shabbat meal, we hold it in the palm of our hand because our cup is overflowing with all of the blessings that we're realizing that we have in our life on this Shabbat. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kirishanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho be'ahava uvratzon hinchilanu zikaron lema'aseh v'reishit ki hu yom techilah למקראי קודש זכר יציאת מצרים קיוונו בחרת ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים ושבת קודשך באהבה וברצון הנחלתנו Baruch atah l'chaim. And last but not least, our motzi, so you can enjoy your beautiful Shabbat meal. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. B'tei avon, everyone. We're going to continue to welcome in Shabbat. I almost forgot there, Rabbi, but I didn't.
You're on this, Cantor. You got
I'm on this. Words that come to us from the Kabbalat Shabbat service, which is what actually happens before the evening service. And these are a series of psalms that are meant to really allow us to let go of the week and to move musically and through the poetry and through the words of our liturgy into a place where we are ready to accept Shabbat. So this is the words of Shiru Ladonai, Shir Chadash, sing unto God a new song. Shiru Ladonai, Shir Chadash, Shiru Ladonai, Kol Haaretz, Shiru Ladonai, Baruchu Shemo, Asru miyom leyom Yeshuato, Sapru v'goyim ke'evoto, Bechol ha'amim biflotav, Ki gadol Adonai, Umhulal me'od, Lo ra'u, Al kol Elohim, ay, Shiru Ladonai, Shir Chadash, Shiru Ladonai, Kol haaretz, Shiru Ladonai, Baruchu Shemo, Basru miyom leyom Yeshuato, Sapru v'goyim ke'evoto, Lechol ha'amim biflotav, Ki gadol Adonai, Umhulal me'od, Lo ra'u, Al kol Elohim, ay, Shiru Ladonai, Shir Chadash, Shiru Ladonai, Kol haaretz.
Last week we did a Hashkivenu, thinking about everything happening in Afghanistan. I talked about Hashkivenu, and again now, after the suicide attack at the airport in Kabul, where over 180 people lost their lives, including at least a dozen U.S. soldiers. It's raised a lot of questions, of course, in these last couple of weeks about America's role in Afghanistan, when we've pulled out, how we've done that, should we have done it, all of that. And there are more questions than answers in my mind, but there are two rules from our tradition that I wanted to share with you about war that I thought are important just for us and for you over the Shabbat to think about and maybe have a conversation about not only our tradition's values, but how does that line up with what our country is dealing with this withdrawal from Afghanistan. The first comes from 2 weeks ago from Torah portion Shoftim, where it says, when you besiege a city for a long time, making war against it in order to take it, you shall not destroy its trees by yielding an axe against them. For you may eat of them, but you shall not cut them down. For is the tree of the field man that it should be besieged by you? In other words, we don't have the right to cut down the fruit trees when we are attacking a city. Now, the rabbis talk about why is this? Well, number one, we shouldn't take away the ability for people in that city to have sustenance. And why are we going to attack these trees which have nothing to do with the war itself? and cut them down, just to spite the people who we are attacking. But they also draw a connection between this idea that if a tree were to be running away from this war, we wouldn't be cutting it down because it's just an innocent tree. So too, if there are people fleeing, we don't have the right to cut them down as well. That's one. The other is this idea that comes from a midrash, the idea that when Israel laid siege in its war with Midian back in the book of Numbers, one side was left open so that the Midianites could flee. One side of their town was left open. And the idea here is that instead of making it impossible for people to escape a war-like environment, you have to give them an out. Not only for the innocent civilians, but when people are boxed in, just like if you think about animals that are cornered, they have nothing to do but to fight for their lives, and they are just going to become enraged. But if we give people an opportunity to escape or a way out, then maybe there can be a little bit more compassion in the war itself. So those are two things that just stuck out in my mind, things that you can maybe take some time thinking about. How are you sitting with what's going on in Afghanistan? It's been 20 years. What does it mean for us as a superpower in the world to be engaged in these kinds of conflicts? And what should we be teaching our children about that? With that, I want to turn it back to the Cantor.
With those big questions on our heart, we're going to take a moment to still our bodies and our minds for the words of the Shema, the watchword of our people, words that encourage us to listen to all the voices around us. And I think right now what we're seeing in the world, that there are people who need us, and that it is perhaps our call as Jewish people to reach out to those who are in need. So I invite you to take a deep breath, let it out, as we cover our eyes, if you're comfortable, to really keep us from the distractions of the world and focus on what it means to be one and to listen to those around us. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed.
We're getting to the end of the book of Deuteronomy. This week is Ki Tavo. As you can see, oops, I doubled up on that Deuteronomy there. There's an interesting thing that's mentioned over and over again in the Torah, but very much so in the book of Deuteronomy, and that's this idea of remembering or memory. It's mentioned 169 times in the Torah. You can add that to your Torah trivia. 13 times 13, so 13 squared for those bar and bat mitzvah, that age squared. That's how many times memory is mentioned. And there is a passage in this week's Torah portion that we recall on a yearly basis, and I want you to see if you can remember as I read it out. My father was a fugitive Aramean. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there, but there he became a great and very populous nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried out to Adonai, the God of our fathers, and God heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. God freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm, an awesome power, and by signs and portents. Adonai brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. That's a passage that we read at the Passover Seder, which is not only our holiday of freedom, but really a time where we think about our collective memory. What does it mean for us as a people? In our tradition, the idea of memory, of storytelling, of our collective story and history is so key to our identity. I'm thinking a lot as we're about to enter the new year, and tomorrow night you can join us for Slichot, which really kicks it off. This idea of the past year and a half, or let's just limit it to the past year. If you were to tell your great-grandchildren the story of this past year, what would it be? Just like every year, we read this passage from this week's Torah portion about this wandering Aramean who had to go into the land of Egypt, was oppressed, and yet found freedom and was brought to the land of milk and honey. What story do you want to tell your great-grandchildren about this pandemic? What has your family endured? What have we endured as a society? And what bend do you want to take? How do you want to angle this? Is this going to be a story of hope and opportunity and optimism? Is it going to be a story of depression, of loss? In some ways, of course, it's both. But how we tell our story is so significant. And as you can see from the passage from this week's Torah portion, even though much of Jewish history is one in which we have been oppressed, there's always at the end of that story a moment of hope. How can you make sure that as we enter into this new year, that you bring some hope with you? With that, we'll take just a moment of silent reflection.
We're going to conclude our time together this evening with a prayer for peace, the words of Oseh Shalom. Oseh Shalom Himrama, Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael, Ve'imru Amen. Ya'aseh Shalom, Ya'aseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh Shalom, Ya'aseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh Shalom, Ya'aseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh Shalom, Ya'aseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh Shalom, Ya'aseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.